The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. We're glad you could join us.
Welcome, everybody.
If you haven't already, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a rating and a comment on whatever listening platform that you get your podcast on.
And you can also head on over to our website, whereourmindswander.com, and email us if there's any topic that you would like us to cover on the show that we haven't covered yet.
That's right. And if we can find enough info on the topic, we will surely cover it in a future episode and we'll let you know when it releases. So with that said, tonight we're going to cover one of our favorite cryptids. So get your favorite beverage, maybe dim the lights, sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it.
So on November 12, 1966, a group of gravediggers in Clendenin, West Virginia, were just doing their job in the cemetery when they noticed something a little alarming. At first, it was nothing but a massive shadow passing over their heads. But as they each glanced up, they saw what they described as a, quote, brown human being soaring from tree to tree. 2 days later in Salem, West Virginia, Newell Partridge was watching TV when strange patterns began waving across the screen. Then he heard a, quote, strange noise outside. And rather curious, he picked up a flashlight and he and his dog Bandit went to investigate. When they stepped outside, Partridge saw what he described as two glowing red circles hovering in the woods. Bandit saw it too and took off after it. Partridge hollered after Bandit, and when the dog didn't return, he went looking for him. He came upon a closed circle made entirely of Bandit's paw prints, but Bandit was nowhere to be found. In fact, Bandit was never found. On November 21st of 2016, Eyewitness News out of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, ran a story about a man who caught some pretty alarming photographs along State Route 2 the day before. There are two, and in the first one, it's frankly impossible not to think that there is some sort of flying, winged man in the sky. I mean, when you look at this photograph, you can clearly see that its head is on the left, the wingspan is huge, and its legs and human-like feet are angled behind it to the right. In the second photograph, it appears to be some sort of gigantic, human-sized moth. Skeptics were quick to say that the first picture is nothing more than a sandbill crane, flying with a rather long snake clutched in its beak. And so I looked at the photos again. I mean, do our due diligence, right? And with that perspective in mind, I kind of wondered if that could be what it actually was. Except there's one major problem. If the crane was flying in the direction it appears to be going, if you're assuming that it's a snake in its beak, The snake is bent the wrong way. It should be flopped down in the same direction the bird is heading, not out straight in front of it. And so, I have to say, it appears to be a genuine photo. But you are all probably wondering what a flying man and a missing dog from the 1960s and a giant winged man from 2016 have to do with each other. Well, I kind of gave you a hint when I said that the creature also looked like a giant colossal moth. 'Cause, yep, tonight we're talking about Mothman. Now, Mothman has been a favorite cryptid of ours for a very long time. And since he seemingly has resurfaced in the last 10 years, with over 161 sightings, with some as recent as last year, we decided it was probably a good time to talk about him. The Mothman story that most people know begins on November 15th, 1966. But if the Gravediggers and Newell Partridge's accounts are to be believed, the story actually began a few days earlier in other parts of West Virginia. Point Pleasant was, by all accounts, a sleepy little town on the north bank of the Kanawha River, a tributary of the Ohio. Today, Point Pleasant has one family-run hotel and a few restaurants. The population is just under 4,000 people. According to Folklife SI.edu, in November of 1966, two couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were in a single car traveling down State Route 62. They had just come in sight of the abandoned National Guard Armory building and power plant when their headlights illuminated something extraordinary. As Roger and Steve later told the Point Pleasant Registry, a 6 or 7 foot tall creature with a 10-foot wingspan, glowing red eyes 6 inches apart, was just standing there. As soon as they saw it, Roger hit the gas, and as they sped away, the creature rose up like a helicopter and flew after them. Even as he pushed his car to the limit, the winged creature kept up, flying as fast as 100 miles per hour. It chased after them all the way to the outskirts of town, where it dropped to the ground and then ran clumsily into a field and disappeared. The Point Pleasant Registry ran an article about the couple's encounter the very next day under the headline, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird, Creature Something." And reporter Mary Heyer with the Athens, Ohio Messenger began covering the story. Her first article, entitled "Winged Red-Eyed Thing Chases Point Pleasant Couples Across Countryside," also came out on November 16, 1966. According to WCHSTV.com, within 3 days, the Gettysburg Times reported 8 additional sightings. 2 of the witnesses were volunteer firemen who said they both saw, quote, "a very large bird with glowing red eyes." Nobody really knew what to think of the sightings, other than the witnesses were credible and that there was possibly some sort of winged man, which resembled a moth in some ways, flying around their town. Skeptics who scoffed at the idea of Mothman pointed out that everyone was simply misidentifying nothing more than a sandhill crane. Sandhill cranes can be as tall as 4 feet, and they do have red coloring around their eyes that could be misinterpreted as glowing red eyes in the heat of the moment and with the car headlights shining on them. Their wingspan ranges from 5.5 to 7.5 feet wide, and they can fly up to 35 miles per hour. Skeptics argued that in their panic, the witnesses simply overestimated their size and their speed. Others jumped on the bandwagon, pointing out that the Mothman sightings were by the defunct munitions plant, and since locals referred to it as the TNT plant, it was possible that a sandhill crane was suffering from some sort of mutation caused by toxic chemicals, which, if you think about it in itself, is still kind of alarming. Additional theories were added to the mix, like the popularity of the Batman TV show, and an interest in Batman comics may have also played a role. There was a Batman character named Killer Moth, which may have led to reporters naming the creature Mothman, which then influenced newspaper readers into thinking the bird they were seeing was actually a man and moth cryptid. Others claimed that it was nothing more than a lone prankster who had dressed up in some sort of costume. And finally, this is the theory that really gets me. There was the theory that Point Pleasant residents were experiencing some sort of mass hysteria fueled by a shared paranoia about the Cold War. Now, I know I don't really need to point out the holes in these theories, but you all know I'm going to do it anyway. I don't think the residents of Point Pleasant were so anxiety-filled over the Cold War that they were suffering from mass hysteria. To me, that's just a little silly and a little insulting. I also don't think they were allowing a comic book character to influence their thoughts either. That's assuming that all the witnesses actually read the Batman comics and they knew who the Killer Moth character was. At the very most, calling the cryptid that was flying around Point Pleasant Mothman in the press was either really clever or just really unimaginative. But what about the sandhill crane theory? Was it possible that the Scarberries and the Millettes startled a sandhill crane, and for whatever reason, it scared them? I mean, in all honesty, sandhill cranes do migrate in the fall through West Virginia. And what if the crane chased after them because it was protecting its young? Could they have gone 35 miles per hour as they fled, but then overestimated their speed because they were in flight mode? Well, it seems kind of plausible, right? And what about that photo that was taken in November of 2016 along State Route 2 that I mentioned earlier? From one perspective, it does look like a giant but normal bird flying along with a snake hanging from its beak. But it still doesn't make sense that the snake seems to be flying out ahead of the bird. It just doesn't make sense as far as gravity and wind stream are concerned. It's really, really hard not to look at the object in the photo as if it is actually heading the other direction. And when you look at it that way, it is undeniably a flying birdman. And not to belabor the point, but I spent about 10 minutes looking at side-by-side photos of sandhill cranes in flight and the 2016 Mothman photo. And frankly, they don't match up at all. Sandhill cranes are skinny-looking while they're in flight, with very long necks and narrow wings. The Mothman photo, if it is a crane, well, it's rather short and stubby in comparison. It's just not the same silhouette whatsoever. So then, because I'm kind of a dork, but I also like to be thorough, I spent another 10 minutes or so looking up large birds of West Virginia and comparing those too, It's not a great blue heron, and it's not a white pelican, which, by the way, they're not native to West Virginia, but a flock of them was spotted in the state in 2023, so I decided to compare them anyway, because that's what I do for our show. I compare bird butts, body shapes, and beaks for 20 minutes. So it's a great mystery, and people would probably still be debating whether a cryptid was really visiting Point Pleasant in 1966 or not, except what happened next in 1967 changed the entire narrative. It was December 15th, and the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, was packed with cars. According to allthat'sinteresting.com, by 1967, the average car weighed 4 times as much as a car from 1928 when the bridge was built. And because the bridge was older, it was built without redundancy in mind. In other words, if one part of the bridge's structure gave way, there was nothing in place to keep the rest of the bridge from collapsing. On that December day, a single eye-bar near the top of the bridge, closest to the Ohio side, cracked. This caused the chain to snap. These two things, which today would be scary but not catastrophic, was unfortunately catastrophic then. 46 people lost their lives as car after car plunged into the icy river, and the bridge came crashing down on top of them. It was a heartbreaking tragedy. And before long, people began to wonder if the Mothman was actually real, and if it had been trying to warn people about the impending disaster. Or worse, it may have even caused it. Now seen as a harbinger of doom, the Mothman was now tied to the Silver Bridge tragedy, whether it deserved to be or not. And I can assume it was the last thing that grieving families wanted to hear about. It was after the bridge tragedy that authors John Keel and Gray Barker got involved. John Keel had been writing and getting published since the age of 12. By 14, he had a weekly column in the Perry Herald and was publishing his own science fiction fanzine. At 16, he dropped out of school after taking every science course his high school had to offer, and he moved to New York City, where he became the editor of a poetry magazine by age 17. He also did freelance work for several newspapers and radio and television shows. Then, during the Korean War, Keel worked at the American Forces Network in Germany as a radio station program writer. Within a year, he was given the job of chief producer for the entire network. So, not bad, considering he was still a teenager. After the war, he traveled to Paris, Berlin, Rome, and Egypt as a foreign radio correspondent. At age 24, while traveling through the Middle East and Southeast Asia, he spent part of his time searching for the Yeti. Then, in the 60s, he returned to the U.S., where he wrote for several television shows, including The Monkees, Get Smart, and Lost in Space. In 1966, he was approached by Playboy, asking him to write a piece on UFOs. He threw himself into the project, which the magazine later rejected and didn't print. But Keel's interest in ufology was piqued. He became one of the leading researchers and writers on UFOs. In fact, he's credited with coining the phrase Men in Black. But in 1967, he made his way to Point Pleasant, where he interviewed hundreds of people about Mothman. And in 1975, arguably his most popular book, The Mothman Prophecies, was published. Advertised as a fully nonfiction account of the Mothman sightings, the book was, and still is, considered the true account of what happened. And when the movie adaptation came out in 2002, starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney, the whole country, if not the world, suddenly knew the true story. The film, which I have to admit I've never actually seen, revolves around Washington Post columnist John Klein, whose wife was seeing visions of a moth-like creature before her death. 2 years later, as he's traveling from Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Virginia, his car breaks down. He walks to the nearest house, where the owner holds a gun on him and demands to know why Klein has shown up on his doorstep in the middle of the night 3 nights in a row. The following morning, Klein discovers that he's actually hundreds of miles off course from Richmond, and he's in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He soon realizes that residents have been seeing Mothman, and the local cop, played by Linney, confides in him that she had a strange dream where the words, "Wake up, number 37, were spoken to her as she drifted in open water. A bunch of supernatural and strange things happen, with the film culminating in Linney's character's Jeep plunging into the river when the Silver Bridge collapses. But Klein is able to save her. They learn that 36 people died, and Linney's character would have been number 37. The movie ends with the disclaimer that they never determined the cause of the bridge collapse. In just my quick synopsis, I left a lot of stuff out, I'm sure you picked up on a few of the inaccuracies, like the number of victims to start with, and the claim that no one could ever figure out why the bridge collapsed. In reality, they did figure it out, and the disaster ushered in new bridge regulation and safety measures to ensure that nothing like it ever happened again. That said, I don't know how closely the movie followed the book, although Keel himself said that he was more than happy with the adaptation. But here's where things get a little murky. Based on letters between Keel and fellow author Gray Barker, Keel's book and his original research notes taken from the witnesses in Point Pleasant are vastly different. It seems that Keel's book was more fiction than nonfiction. To be fair, it does claim to only be based on actual events. And then there's Gray Barker's book, The Silver Bridge. Barker was also known for writing about UFOs, and interestingly, Wikipedia also gives him credit for coining the term Men in Black in 1956. Barker became interested in the Flatwoods Monster back in the early 50s and submitted a piece about the alien cryptid to Fate magazine. Then he began writing pieces regularly for Space Review magazine. He published his first book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, in 1956. His book, The Silver Bridge, tied the Point Pleasant Bridge collapse to Mothman as well, except his book came out 5 years before John Keel's Mothman Prophecies. According to the Reader MIT Press, Barker initially planned to title The Silver Bridge Mothman, the Great Bird That Terrified Point Pleasant. He referred to it in a letter to a friend as a, quote, monstrous child, and that he was, quote, throwing in a little fantasy in order to, quote, transcend the usual crap. He said himself that it quickly changed from being a straight account of events to a fictional exploration of people's fears. He later told John Keel, quote, I started writing this as a more or less straight account, but the other stuff got to creeping in. I figured that a straight saucer monster book wouldn't get too much mileage in the trade anyhow. So I just went ahead and did it the way I really wanted to do it. To me, it captures the feelings and emotions I experienced while in Point Pleasant doing the investigations, which somehow turned out to be a hauntingly beautiful thing. Because the book included real people, like Newell Partridge, the owner of the lost dog named Bandit, readers tended to take it as truth. And Barker was actually known for pulling pranks and sometimes even elaborate hoaxes as a way to further his writing career. He has been described as a major skeptic who only promoted ideas about UFOs and cryptids to line his own pockets. So, it's really hard to say if a Mothman-like creature really ever did visit Point Pleasant. And it's nearly impossible to prove that if it did, that it was related to the Silver Bridge disaster in any way. After the bridge collapsed, no one in Point Pleasant ever saw the winged creature again. And whatever it was, it appeared to be a one-time event that hopefully and thankfully wouldn't repeat itself. But with the release of the film in 2002, the annual Mothman Festival began. Held on the third weekend in September, it's a huge event that brings in vendors, musical performers, and guest speakers. The 15,000 to 25,000 visitors can come in costume, take bus tours out to the former TNT plant, and walk through the Mothman Museum. They can also have their photo taken with the 12-foot-tall, iconic Mothman statue. But as for the cryptid itself, it hadn't been seen for 44 years. But it would be seen again. And we'll get into that after this quick break. Hey, did you know? For all the bookworms out there, the town of Wigtown, Scotland is known as Scotland's National Book Town. With a population of just 800 people, the 17 bookstores in town offer more than enough reading material. Estimated to have several 100,000 titles, the town also holds an annual 10-day-long book festival. But for anyone who dreams of owning their own bookshop in the quaint little town, you can always rent the Open Book, a bookstore that allows you to be the sole proprietor and also serves as an Airbnb, since you can sleep in the apartment above the shop. While you're there, you can set the store's hours, sell books all day long, or just curl up in the corner with any possible book you could wish for. It's so popular that it's perpetually booked, no pun intended, 2 years in advance. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back from the break. And I gotta say, Beth and I were discussing how we hadn't seen the Mothman prophecies. So, what we did was, after the break, we paused recording this episode for 2 hours. And we watched the Mothman prophecies.
We did.
And we wasted 2 hours.
Well, it was not what we were expecting at all.
No, it was a psychological thriller.
Right, which if we'd read like the little, synopsis under the film title, we probably would have realized that. But we just watched it thinking, we should.
Right. We felt like we couldn't really do the episode justice without seeing it. And as far as the actors go, they were all really good.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Richard Gere.
Yeah. Laura Linney and Deborah Messing and Will Patton was excellent.
Yeah, the acting was excellent. But the movie itself, if you haven't seen it, I would advise seeing it just so you can get an understanding what we mean. But yeah, it really didn't have much to do with Mothman other than it was a psychological thriller involving Mothman.
Peripherally, like you never even see him.
Right.
And it doesn't follow John Keel's book at all.
No.
It's a completely different story. And Keel's book at least went into the Mothman sightings, and then he related it to other types of sightings throughout history, and then he offered his own opinions about how it was supernatural and tied to the bridge, and So, yeah, the movie doesn't...
Yeah, and that's just our opinion.
Right.
You'd have to see it for yourself. But we wanted to let you know that we felt like we needed to see it, which we should have done before recording the episode, but hey.
Now we can say we have, and we'll probably never watch it again.
No. So back to our episode. Beth was saying before the break how the Mothman hadn't been seen in 44 years. Well, that wasn't until 2011 when stories began to come out of Chicago that a massive winged creature was flying around the city. Estimated to be between 5 and 7 feet tall, the creature's wingspan reached 10 feet, and it had glowing red eyes. According to allthat'sinteresting.com, author and paranormal enthusiast Lon Strickler began receiving reports on his popular Phantoms and Monsters blog. The first was posted on October 13th, about an encounter a man had had on August 22nd. The man claimed that while he was driving through the Chicago suburbs, he pulled over to take photos of a Native American statue on top of a building. When he got home, he was looking through the pictures, and he noticed what looked like a giant winged creature flying in the background. A second post also popped up, this time from a college student at the University of Illinois, Chicago. They wrote that on September 30th, they all ran into their housemate's room when they heard her scream. They found her crouched in the corner, pale and shaking. She said that as she was getting dressed, she happened to look out her third-story window and saw 2 glowing orange eyes peering in at her. She described it as feeling as though she was the prey, and whatever this thing was, it was about to pounce on her. The witness said the phone rang, and as they talked to the caller, they glanced out the window and were startled to see 2 glowing orange eyes staring back at them. Over the next few years, a smattering of reports came in. Mothman was swooping down on pedestrians and dropping onto car hoods. But it was 2017 when the majority of sightings happened, 55 to be exact, like John Amatrano. According to Vice.com, Amatrano was working his regular Friday night shift as a bouncer at the Owl, a popular Logan Square hangout. When he took a break and went outside, he noticed a plane flying overhead. But he said there was something else, quote, flying awkwardly underneath it. He said it looked like a pterodactyl and didn't fly like a bird or a bat. He said it had muscular legs, a jutting tailbone, and a humanoid shape, which meant it flew in a sort of, quote, strange swooping motion. He remembered thinking at the time that this was the worst time for his phone to be back inside the bar charging. Of the 54 other sightings, witnesses described anything from a large bat-like creature with glowing red eyes to a gothic gargoyle. And then 2 years later, in 2019, the sightings started at the O'Hare International Airport, or at least that's when people started reporting them. According to HangarOnePublishing.com, a truck driver was waiting to pick up a load at the cargo area in November. He had gotten out of his truck for a cigarette break and had walked over to the fence at the edge of the parking lot. As he stood there, he saw a tall bird-like entity on the other side. It looked like, quote, a person with wings that were stretched out and flapping. It had glowing red eyes, and then it let out a bone-chilling shriek, similar to the sound of trains' brakes screeching, before it launched into the sky and flew away. And then in 2020, a UPS driver made her way to her car in the parking lot. She noticed what she thought was a person in a long black coat standing at the far end of the lot. As she unlocked her car, her headlights flashed and illuminated this figure. She was terrified to see that it wasn't a human at all, but a tall bat-like creature with glowing red eyes. It unfurled its wings and began emitting a, quote, rapid chirping sound that ended with a loud screech. Then the thing charged her, running straight towards her before it took off in flight and flew away. A third really interesting and equally alarming encounter took place in broad daylight. A firefighter stationed at the airport had gone up to the roof of the HVAC plant for his break. He was pretty startled when he realized he wasn't alone. Standing at the edge of the roof was the Mothman, staring at the fireman with its glowing red eyes. The two of them continued to stare at each other until the creature slowly unfurled its wings and took off. So, 10 years of sightings have happened in Chicago. Lon Strickler says that there have been over 160 in just a decade, which begs the question, what does it all mean? Now, he believes that Chicagoans don't need to worry, that it doesn't seem to be the harbinger of doom that people claim it is. But he also believes, based on the locations and timings of the sightings, that there has to be more than one creature. But that doesn't solve the mystery of why it's there. Was some sort of disaster averted that none of us know about? Because Mothman also reportedly showed up in Fukushima, Japan in February of 2011. According to Journal News Online, a man named Marcus Puels was in the town of Okuma on business that February. He and a friend had decided to walk around town that night, and they made their way past the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear power plant and down to the beach. As they walked along, they both heard a loud whoosh sound overhead, followed by an ear-piercing shriek. Another couple on the beach had also stopped and looked up. The whoosh sound and the shriek happened again. Puels described it as sounding like bad brakes on a bus. He and his friend and the other couple were looking all around for where the sound was coming from when the young couple began pointing frantically at the nuclear plant. Now that's kind of weird because the other guy described it as train brakes screeching, and he's describing it as bad brakes on a bus.
Very mechanical almost.
Yes. Perched on its roof and illuminated by the facility's lights was the dark shadow of some sort of creature. As they watched, the creature stood up and unfurled giant bat-like wings. Puels said, quote, the creature then took flight and circled the plant at least 4 to 5 times. Some circuits he took at a fast pace. Some he seemed to slow down. All the while he kept his attention on the row of square-shaped buildings that I later found out housed the reactors.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy as all hell. The creature then came toward us, flying at least 25 to 30 feet off the ground. The younger couple, who had noticed the creature first, were now screaming and cowering, the man shielding the woman while shielding his head with a jacket. My friend and I looked in awe as this creature flew over us. That's when I noticed the 2 large red eyes. They seemed to glow from within and with a blood-red hue. They were unblinking in the 3 to 4 seconds we saw them. We knew that they were looking straight at us. We knew this creature, knew we could see it, and it made no attempt to disguise itself. The sick, intense, and overwhelming feeling of dread came over us. A feeling that we shouldn't be there was, to say the least, overwhelming. The two of them got out of there as quickly as they could and returned to their friend's apartment. They talked about it at length and convinced themselves that it was just a large, regular bird that looked distorted in the lights from the plant. A month later, back in the States, Pules was woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call from the friend in Okuma. There had been a massive earthquake which had triggered a tsunami. There had also been a catastrophic meltdown at the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear plant. So, was it a coincidence or not? Was it Mothman or not? So, it's definitely pretty strange, and I could see how it could make some people feel pretty fearful, especially in Chicago. But keep in mind, with the other Mothman sightings, disasters happen pretty quickly after the sightings. It's been a decade of alleged sightings in Chicago.
Yeah, a whole 10 years.
Right.
Right. If Mothman is even a harbinger of doom. I mean, he might not be, and it's just weird coincidences.
Well, that's how I kind of feel about it. I don't think the bridge collapsing had anything to do with Mothman whatsoever.
No, it had to do with the bridge being overloaded by cars, and it was 40 years past when it should have been updated.
Right.
Yeah.
But to wrap up our episode tonight, I want to go back to 1963, 3 years before the West Virginia sightings began, to the Bat Beast of Kent, England.
The Bat Beast. I love it already.
Yeah, me too. According to Skeptic.org UK, the story has been retold and embellished numerous times, but the original report goes like this. The Kent Messenger reported in their November 29th edition that a group of teenagers were walking through the town of Saltwood towards the Sandling railway station, so that one of them, 16-year-old Jenny Holloway, could catch a train home. 17-year-old John Flaxton reported that as they walked, they saw a red light, like a ball of fire. Standing in the center of the light was a figure dressed in a scarlet-red cloak, which appeared to have webbed feet. It was carrying a red lantern. And get this, it didn't have a head.
Oh my gosh. The Bat Beast is headless.
Right. So, of course, the kids panicked and ran. Initially, they thought it was some sort of ghost. And after talking about it a little bit, they realized that it probably did have a head. They just couldn't see it because the light from the lantern wasn't bright enough. And then in subsequent reports, the group of teenagers began questioning whether the figure was wearing a cloak or if it actually had bat-like wings. This, they said, made more sense with its webbed feet. Once the newspaper article came out, another witness came forward, 18-year-old Graham Leggett. He claimed that he had seen something very similar about 18 months earlier, but he was so afraid that no one would believe him. He said he saw a reddish-yellow glowing light and an eerie bat-like creature that stepped out of it. At this point, the local clergy got involved, saying that rumors of a black magic circle had been going around and that conjuring such a creature was exactly something that they would do.
Oh my goodness. I mean, they are all teenagers walking around at night. They must be into black magic.
Right. Conjuring creatures. My God. On November 27th, 17-year-old Keith Croucher reported seeing a strange orb of light surrounded by a golden mist, but he didn't see any creature. Up until this point, all the witnesses were teenagers. But William Waite, a retired civil servant who worked for the Aeronautical Inspection Board, had his own sighting. He said he had been out walking with his dog when he saw a bluish-white orb, about the size of a golf ball, floating along ahead of him. It crossed Sandling Road, where all the previous sightings had taken place, and then headed out to sea. Skeptics pointed out that the cloaked figure could have simply been a railway worker, checking the tracks before disappearing inside the small building that sat just below eye level of the road. But that doesn't explain the webbed feet. So, there is some contention over whether or not this cloaked, lantern-holding figure was actually a ghost, or a railway employee doing his job, or an earlier sighting of Mothman. But I figure I'd let you all decide for yourselves. And that's the thing about Mothman. Everybody pretty much needs to come to their own conclusions. We certainly can't say whether it existed or not, but it is interesting to think about.
And talk about.
Yeah, now, Mothman's always been one of my many favorite cryptids. But, like I said before, I don't think it's the harbinger of doom.
Right.
Now, I believe all these people are seeing something that's strange out there in the night sky.
I agree with you, and there's photographs to prove it.
Yeah, that there is. Now, if you look at them online, you can come to your own conclusion. I mean, I looked at it, I zoomed it in, and that was a long time ago, and I just did it recently, and yeah, it doesn't really look like a bird to me.
No, and I spent a lot of time looking at that photo and trying to, like I said, compare it to known birds, and I don't know.
Right.
It's bizarre.
I don't either. But these people, like we had said before about a lot of these cryptids, these people are seeing something, or they believe they are really seeing something. And, you know, there's too many instances when it's police officers or EMTs or military. They're all not just making something up in their head or mass hysteria. They're actually seeing something.
Right.
And I don't like to say, well, you know, it's just because the military saw or police officers. I mean, that doesn't seem fair to the general public either. Like, their opinions or their testimonies aren't as good.
Right. Or the group of teenagers in England, right? Oh, they're all teenagers. They're just making it up. Well, that's not necessarily true.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So there you have it. The Mothman.
The Mothman. We need to go to the festival one year. We do know somebody that has been, and they had a great time. So that'd be a cool thing to go to.
I know. I see it pop up on Facebook quite a bit.
Yeah, it's in September.
Yeah. Well,
Someday.
Who knows? We've got so much going on all the time.
I know.
And we have the Bigfoot Festival in September.
Oh, it's the same weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bummer.
But we've been to that quite a few years now as vendors, so perhaps Virginia would be the place to go.
West Virginia? We could go to Virginia, but we wouldn't go to the festival that way.
You know what I mean.
Yes. And just to be clear, we would not be there as vendors, everybody.
No.
We would just be there as visitors.
Tourists.
Yes.
Yes. Well, like we always say, go ahead and check out our show notes, because there are certain things that we just can't get to, little things. Maybe a little bit more of a description or history, but we try to cover it all.
Yes, and we have a bunch of sources for this episode, including links to where some of those photographs are.
Right. And it's always just good to read it yourself.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps it up, Beth.
Yes, it does.
Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.